I'd just like to thank Angus Australia for inviting me back to speak. I've had the privilege of speaking at the last couple of conferences, so it's a good moment in time to be able to hopefully spread some knowledge in the field of assisted reproduction around. So the topic that I was given, and I guess I said that I would love to present on, is advancements in reproductive management for commercial producers. And when I sat down to sort of look at this and think about what would be best to speak about, I decided that I'd just like to probably present some of the technologies that actually are being used by commercial producers, but I will admit that they are on the edge. So what I will talk to you about today may not be particularly something that all of you would be able to take home and apply tomorrow, but it might be something that you might think about in the future. But what I can say is it is commercial producers that are doing this. I think this is my, yeah. So just a bit of an outline of what I'll talk about today. I'll just briefly describe the composition of a beef herd, but more how that fits with assisted reproduction. Talk about how embryo transfer and AI is being used in real commercial herds. And then I'd just like to overlay how sex-sorted semen is being used as a commercial reality. I'll talk about a new protocol called the JSync protocol, but the reasons I want to talk about this is more about how we manage some of these cool assisted reproduction programs in a practical sense for commercial producers. So I don't want to bog down too much in terms of the details of those protocols, but certainly step you through how these things are managed in a very practical sense with quite good results. No need to introduce myself because Christian did such an excellent job of that, but I'd like to acknowledge Gabriel Bo from Argentina. He's a professor of reproduction at the University of Cordoba. Gabriel was very kind to supply me with a lot of the content for my presentation today because we all know the South Americans are very good at being some of the first movers in this space, and a lot of the real data from commercial herds is actually from Argentina itself. So thank you very much, Gabrielle. So this is a very, very basic, I guess, description of what most herds look like. And as I said, I want to put this in the context of how assisted reproduction works. But I think if you've got 10 cows or 1,000 cows, at the end of the day, we can split our cows into being elite cows, multipliers, the cows that you wouldn't mind having heaps more of those genetics. And then we've probably got cows in our herds which are there just to produce beef or just for production. I suspect in dry times, a lot of that bottom part of the triangle may have been wiped out, but let's think of this in a time when we've got a fair bit of our breeders about. But what I'd like to say is that realistically we can't split our cows into this triangle unless we utilise our genetic selection tools. So whatever you choose those to be in your herd, in my opinion, you need to know what genetics you want to multiply and where you want to invest before you go looking at assisted reproduction. Now, I'm not saying if you're a commercial producer that really can't identify where your cows are as yet, I'm not saying that assisted reproduction is not for you. It's just that you may not be thinking about the cool stuff that I'm about to talk about. So, yeah, your investment in your genetics is really what we're talking about. So we've got two ways, I guess, we can split our assisted reproduction. You're either focusing on your cow, you may have identified really elite cows in your groups, or you might be focusing on the bull. I mean, obviously you need the bulls and you need the cows in both sections, but it's what you want to multiply the most. If we're focusing on the cow, really we're looking at the technologies of embryo transfer or IVF to maximise those genetics. And we're trying to produce more calves than what would be her natural potential. Of course, if we're trying to maximise the genetics of a bull, we're looking at AI or fixed time AI, which I hope a lot of you have heard about, or natural mating. Now, embryo transfer, particularly for British breeds, is the most cost-effective way for assisted reproduction to produce a calf born. And the pregnancy rates tend to be predictable, but what I would say is there does tend to be some variation in donor cow response, which can be the downfall of that program. IVF, which most of you have probably heard about, It can cost more per calf born at the moment, but it does allow multiple sessions, multiple collections of eggs off the ovaries. You can do it when they're early pregnant, but the frozen embryo technique, I would say, needs more development, and at the moment it's probably best suited for Bos indicus breeds. Artificial insemination or fixed time, and I'm probably more focusing on the fixed time here, but you do get more calves from your elite sires. Fixed time AI is very easy for commercial application. You do get added fertility benefits and you will get earlier calves. Natural mating is actually not that cost effective if you're using a high value bull or high potential bull, because a bull can only mate with so many cows per year, produce you so many calves naturally. If you do invest in genetics, sometimes if you sit down and actually do the maths, you can find that natural mating is actually more expensive than using artificial insemination. Obviously it depends on how much you spend on your bulls. But if you're just interested in producing beef with no genetic improvement, well, of course, I can see that natural mating does have its benefits in terms of cost effectiveness. I just want to overlay on the top of this the concept of sex-sorted semen, because with sex-sorted semen you can really start to then target your genetic improvement direction. You may be wanting to produce steers with really high carcass value, and you know that a candidate bull has exactly what you're after. You may then be looking at producing a female line with particular traits to be able to build your female herd. So sex-sorted semen, I think, just adds a layer to these technologies which helps you put your direction and get to where you want to be faster. So if we just break this down into how this works across our herds, really if we're talking about our elite cows, it's where we want to engage in the embryo transfer, IVF and even AI. Multipliers, of course, AI, natural mating, potentially even recipient cows for the embryos. Depends on how hard someone wants to go into embryo transfer. And a lot of people are actually splitting their herds up and using their production cows as recipient for embryo transfer. This way they're not culling these cows, they still have them in their herd if for some reason they realise that later on they made the wrong decisions about their genetic potential. And of course, natural mating. I'd just like to show you, this is an actual real life example of how some large commercial breeders I know in Queensland are actually managing their herd, purely commercial. So they've identified their elite cows, so in their first cycle they are flushing the cows, they're either freezing them or transferring them fresh into their cows that they've identified in their production herd. So the production cows are not actually, transferring their genetics on. All they're doing is multiplying the genetics of those elite cows. The multiplier herd they are using for AI, so of course they're still quite happy to have those genetics motoring along in their herd. As I said, some people that are really pushing those elite cows hard will also be putting embryos into the multiplier. Of course, if you wanted to go in a different genetic direction, you could also be purchasing embryos into the production herd. The second cycle, they are either flushing again or using AI. Some people are also using IVF mixed with embryo transfer to give the cows a little bit of a balance at that elite level. And then again using their production cows as recipients and the multipliers as fixed time. So it's quite possible in commercial herds to get 2 fixed time AIs back to back in the first and second cycle. And a lot of people that come to me, they say, well, how do I get more AI calves? And I guess we are limited by our technologies and how good we are in terms of pregnancy rate. So what people are doing now is actually doing back-to-back AIs to be able to try and get as many cows as they can in calf to elite genetics. And of course, depending on how hard you want to go with the embryos as to whether you put a bull. The third cycle, generally the elite cows are going back in calf or being placed with a bull. The multipliers, I'm not seeing too many commercial herds go more than 2 rounds. I do know in Brazil, some people are eliminating the use of bulls completely and doing 3 rounds of fixed time AI and then culling anything that's not in calf. And the production cows, of course, by that point in time, they're either using a bull just to produce beef or culling them. Again, it just depends on how hard people want to engage. But as I said, these are real-time beef producers, but they are pushing it at that level to try and get the best carcasses they can, because they've identified the difference between them producing a carcass out of average genetics as compared to elite genetics is actually quite substantial in terms of value. So as I said, I'd just like to now overlay this concept of sex-sorted semen and just give you some tools of how this can be incorporated into commercial herds. For those that don't understand the process of sex-sorted semen, essentially, and I'll say it in very brief terms because this is not my area of expertise, but essentially the semen cells are placed in a linear format, one by one, and they're dyed with a stain. And so the X-bearing sperm, so the female sperm, they have more dye than those of the Y. And so a laser is fired at those. Those that shine brighter are the X sperm. They put a charge on them and are then diverted into the female pot. The males go into the male pot, and then obviously there's ones that can't be identified that go into the waste. So this, as you can see, is quite a laborious process on the sperm cells themselves. And I guess what that ends up with sex-sorted semen is you have a lower dose, and then you also end up with semen that is probably, it's not a marathon runner. Your conventional semen can live in the tractor a lot longer. Our sex-sorted semen needs to get to the point of ovulation quicker, so we need to be more precise in the way that we handle it. The technology has improved significantly over the years, and hence why it's now quite a good commercial reality. I'll just present to you, to start off with, a study that was actually in Brazil. Now, I know this is in Zebu beef cows with Angus male sex-sorted semen. The thing I can say about producing Brahman or Nelore data to an Angus crowd is if it works in Brahmans, I know it's definitely going to work in Angus cattle. If I'm presenting the other way around, sometimes the indicas have just got their little nuances, and I can't promise that it'll work as well. So, yeah, don't let that sort of distract you. So essentially, this was just a very, very basic trial where they looked at the difference in a conventional, a stock standard synchronisation program. So there was no bells and whistles at the difference between conventional semen and sex-sorted semen. My understanding between the sex ultra and sex pure is the pure has the dead cells removed. But for the purpose of this trial, there was really not a lot of difference. And so what it demonstrated here, that just on a blanket AI with really no checks and balances, they received 51% to conventional AI and 42% to their sex ultra. The 82 and 84% represent the relative fertility. So in other words, our sex ultra is actually working at 84% of the conventional AI. Now, what I found interesting about this study is they obviously looked a little bit deeper, and what they measured was through the presence of the little estrotech patches which are on those cows, the amount of cows that presented that had been in heat at the time of AI and those that hadn't. And what they found is there was actually an interaction in the data that showed that those animals that were on heat actually had really good conception rates and almost was comparable to the conventional AI. So this starts to show and bring out little hints about how we can manage our sex-sorted semen in these programs from a commercial reality to get a really good result. When we looked at the no estrus, of course, you can see that the sex semen was quite compromised. The reason being, as I said, the sex semen doesn't have the legs that the conventional semen does. If the animals have had their heat, they're going to have a much more synchronous ovulation, so we know that the semen's got there when it needed to be there. Now, if I just change your attention a little bit and just bring you to a protocol called the J-Sync protocol. Now, the reason I'm talking about this protocol is because it provides a really good platform for commercial producers to be able to engage in sex-sorted semen. So at the very top, we have a very standard program that you may or may not use, where you basically use an 8-day QMate for 8-day insertion of the QMate with a dose of estradiol benzoate at the start of the program. If you're an EU producer, obviously you can't use estradiol. But the period between day 8 and 10, so the time we remove the progesterone device and give our prostaglandin, and the time that we AI them, we're calling the pro-estrus period, so the period just before estrus and ovulation. The J-Sync protocol, or the new protocols and the way that we are tending to head with our protocols these days, is extending that pro-estrus period. So in order to do that, we're actually shortening the period in which the Q-mate device is in situ in the cow. This then gives, sorry, I don't really have a pointer here, but you can see the follicles as they grow. So what we're doing is basically giving those follicles a longer time to grow, which gives us bigger follicles. Bigger follicles are more mature. We know they tend to be more fertile and have a better corpus luteum, which maintains the pregnancy afterwards. So that's the concept of the J-Sync protocol. When they were sorting out and looking at the different timing in the J-Sync protocol, they looked at inseminating 48 hours after 60 hours and 72 hours. And this data basically confirms the reason why we do want to have the longer duration of pro-estrus. I've actually done a very similar study myself just before I left the University of Queensland, and I did this in Brahman cattle, but I didn't use GnRH, and we found a very, very similar concept. So what the results showed, you can see there is a tendency to increase our follicular diameter. So GnRH 72 hours is the time of fixed time AI, where we also give GnRH. So the longer the duration, we had a better follicular diameter. We had a better incidence of heat, so tail paint rubbed off is obviously those animals that had an estrus. And we had a better incidence of those animals that had actually ovulated at the time of fixed time AI. But what's important, we did see an increase in pregnancy, tendency to increase in pregnancy rate with this longer duration. They've further extrapolated this to, better gene expression in the uterus, and there's a lot more mechanisms that is probably really too much to talk about today, but in terms of it is a better fertility around these programs. So they looked at the J-Sync program versus the conventional program just in a commercial setting, and over 2,350 odd heifers, British bred heifers in Argentina, they certainly found that the J-Sync program has been punching above its weight, I guess. The only thing I will say is the conventional program here shown in Argentina has a product, the CE, at the time of progesterone removal, which is estradiol cypionate. Some people may or may not know that, but we don't have that product in Australia. Our benzoate programs work better than this, so potentially the quantum gain in our country may not be as much, but I'm very confident in terms of this as the protocol to move forward in beef heifers. So if I just track back and now start to think about this from a sex-sorted semen perspective, what we demonstrate here is the point of fixed time AI in a conventional program, so 56 hours after device removal, or in a J-Sync program, 72 hours. And what you can see is the proportion of heifers that ovulated and those that got pregnant. Now, the issue we have when we start to think about sex-sorted semen is in this program, we have these heifers that have quite successfully ovulated and become pregnant 48 hours after they were inseminated. Generally, most people will say that semen survives in the tract for 24 hours. That's quite true, but remember, everything is a bell curve. And when we're talking about fixed time AI, we just try and hit the middle where we know it's most successful. I've actually had heifers ovulate out to more than 100 hours after I've inseminated them, and they've actually gotten pregnant. So it's amazing how good some of that semen is. But this is conventional semen. This is not sex-sorted semen that has a reduced lifespan in the tract. But that's not a problem. So what the Gabrielle's team did is they looked at the timing of AI and when heifers came on in sex-sorted protocols to see what they would get. So they looked at the animals that were on heat 60 hours after device removal, and then AI'd them at the 72 hours. And then they also recorded the animals that were on heat within the 72 hours and device removal. From device removal to fixed time AI at 72 hours. Then anything that, that's those girls, so anything that was on heat, they also inseminated there. And then anything that wasn't on heat, they administered GnRH at the 72 hours and delayed their AI until the 84 hours. So what they found that giving them the J-Sync program, they had 73% of animals that were on heat within 60 to 72 hours. Now those girls that, I just make the comment that the relative fertility on the sex semen versus the non-sex was 85%. I'm finding that as a bit of a common theme through these slides. But what we have is those animals that were at 60, on heat at 60 hours but fixed timed at 72 were 64%, and 59 and 69% for the non-sexed. When we looked at those animals that were on at 72 and AI'd at 72 hours, they were 45 and 58, so probably maybe they were AI'd a little bit too early on the sex semen side of things. And those animals, which is not unexpected, that were not seen on heat but given GnRH and fixed time AI'd at 84 hours were a little bit reduced compared to the other groups. We know this. We know that animals don't have a heat in the programs, even though we do induce them. It's not that they don't go in calf, we just know they're not going to be as good as the ones that do go in calf. So they then extrapolated this over a bigger trial, and really what they found is that the total pregnancy rate being the 52%, but what we did see is this 72 hours seems to be about the golden spot for the first round of insemination. However, if you blanket AI'd everything here, you're really not going to pick up those animals for the later time. With those animals at the 84 hours, a lot of people, you'll be used to programs where you give GnRH at the same time that you AI. That is fine in conventional semen, but the time after you give GnRH, you're looking probably around about 30 hours till that animal ovulates. With good long semen, that's fine. In sex-sorted semen, you're just not going to have the time to do it. So hence why, where possible, if you can give GnRH 12 hours before your AI, I know it's more handling for you guys, but it does give you better results. So really this came to devise the recommended protocol for sex-sorted semen, which I think from a commercial reality is actually quite neat. So basically insert a Qmate device with estradiol. If your EU producers come and talk to me, I can help you out with a different protocol for 6 days. Anything that comes on heat but up until 72 hours, so you don't have to do heat detection. It's literally by just putting a patch, tail paint or something like that on the animals. At the time of 72 hours, everything runs up the race. Anything that has a patch, you just inseminate, no more drugs required. And anything that doesn't have a patch rubbed, administer GnRH and basically draft at that point in time. Leave them in the yards for an additional 12 hours if you're happy to put a bit of hay in front of them, so that's anything that's not in heat GnRH, and then come back 12 hours later and inseminate the balance of your herd. Now I say that this is a sex semen protocol, but I would be really confident if someone's happy to put a little bit more extra work in, this would work really neatly with conventional semen as well. So I hope that's just given you guys a little bit of perspective of, how some of these, more cutting edge technologies are actually now really a commercial reality. And yeah, I think it's a really neat way as in terms of pushing genetic improvement forward. I'd just like to give a quick plug to our online resource, repro360.com. We put a lot of this information up on this website. We try and keep it live, so it's there as a tool for you guys as breeders to go there, upskill yourself, ask questions, get in touch with us if you've got any questions around your genetic improvement programs. We don't believe in a one-size-fits-all. We believe in trying to work out what your objectives are and helping you guys work towards it. So thank you very much, and I'll be around for the rest of the day if anyone wants to chat.
Thank you. Thanks, Sophia. We do have time for a question or two. So is there any questions? We've got a roving mic here, so if you do have a question, we'll come to you. Does anyone have any questions about what Sophia just presented or anything in particular in that space? Sam, just wait for the mic, mate.
Sophia, Sam White, thanks very much for a great presentation. Just my question, ODB, is that Citarol?
Yes, sorry, yep. It's called, they don't have Citarol in the market anymore, it's Bomarol now, but yes, yep.
Yep. And in an EU circumstance, what's your alternative? at that point?
Gets a little bit more complicated because the Bomarol or estradiol benzoate and progesterone is a really effective cheap tool, but now we basically limited the use of GnRH only or not. Without going into too much detail, we basically do a very similar program to the J-Sync, but you use GnRH at the start. In heifers, it's hit and miss, and the evidence actually says don't do it at all because it's like 50-50 either way, so you may as well not do it. In cows, though, so you don't give any GnRH. I'm probably getting a little bit convoluted, but anyone who wants to talk about it in depth, just come and find me. But in cows, we do give a GnRH at the beginning because it does work more reliably. But the problem with GnRH is we make them ovulate. And so when we remove the device, we're trying to get rid of, once they ovulate, they produce a gland called the corpus luteum that we need to get rid of before they go into AI. That's why you give prostaglandin. And if it's a young CL, you have to really go hard at that CL to get rid of it. So we actually recommend 2 prostaglandin injections, which are 8 to 24 hours apart. So it's a little bit more annoying for EU producers, I'm sorry, but we've got some answers for you. But yeah, just come and talk to me and I can walk anyone through detail if they've got that problem.
Okay, for time, we might have to keep moving on, but thanks, Sophia. Stay up here for a second, please. Sophia, come back. Yeah, thanks, everyone. That's a great presentation. Token of our appreciation. Thank you. I think we need to get a photo, so just stand over there.
Great. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.